You're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. And it lies between the pit of one's fears and the summit of one's knowledge. You are now traveling through a dimension of imagination. You just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and if this is your first time listening, Anthology is one man's examination of the Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer. Each podcast, I share my first impressions, analysis, and overall thoughts on Rod Serling's iconic series, one episode at a time. However, in this bonus episode review series, I am reviewing Monkey Paw Productions' Twilight Zone reboot on CBS All-Access, hosted by Jordan Peele. If you want to contact me, you can use the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod, tweet me at OVAnthologypod, or send an email to matt@obsessiveviewer.com. Any and all feedback or conversation or what have you is very well recommended because it's just me on the microphone, and I love hearing from listeners. Also, you can find more of Anthology at my website, anthologypod.com, where I just recently revamped the menus a little bit, so now you can view the archive for the main feed and view a separate archive for bonus and special episodes. So that's just a way to kind of make it a little more accessible to find, like, if you're looking for a specific episode of The Twilight Zone, you can just go to the main feed archive and see all of the episodes of The Twilight Zone I've reviewed. Or if you want to check out, like, say, my review of Season 3 of Black Mirror, you can just go to the bonus episode archive and find that there. I have the bonus episodes separated by show title, so so enjoy that. You can also now filter the posts that appear on the homepage by the different titles of TV shows I've reviewed. So if you just want to see a display of the most recent episodes of The Twilight Zone that I've reviewed, you can just click the Twilight Zone, tab under, I think the heading is something like, filter episodes by show title. Same goes for Twilight Zone 2019, Black Mirror, Science Fiction Theater, all that stuff. So anyway, enjoy that revamping on the website. And so today on the podcast, I will be discussing or reviewing by myself Not All Men. It's the 7th episode of the Twilight Zone's first season, and it originally premiered on May 9th, 2019 on CBS All-Access. And before I get into my review of the episode, I do have some notes from previous episodes of the podcast, and really, these just boil down to things that I missed from previous episodes of the new Twilight Zone run. So, going way back to Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. I did something kind of really nerdy and weird today. I am not stressing out over this, but I am at a point where I am now, I think, 3 episodes behind on the new Twilight Zone, and I'm recording this the night before the season finale drops on CBS All Access. So I have a bit of a backlog to go through. And I have a bunch of episodes of The Twilight Zone I need to watch, both old and new. So what I did was since I've been adding clips from the episodes in the podcast more recently, I have MP3 rips of the episodes. So what I did today, in my supreme nerdy mind, a peek behind the curtain. It was my first day back at my day job, in 5 days. I had a 5-day weekend because I took off Friday and Tuesday, and of course Memorial Day was Monday. So, my first day back, I took the episodes that I need to record reviews of. So I took, anyway, it's neither here nor there. I took the MP3s, put them on my phone, and then I listened to the episodes of the original Twilight Zone and the new Twilight Zone as I was working, as if they were a podcast or radio drama. So after I listened to the ones that I are pending reviews, I went back and started listening from the beginning of the 2019 Twilight Zone, and that's when I realized that in Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, the music that's played at the beginning and at the magazine stand where Justin Sanderson meets Joe Beaumont, the music that's playing is like this kind of like, I don't know if it's technically muzak, but it's like a melody of Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra, which plays at the end of the episode. So I thought that was an interesting thing that I didn't catch the millions of times I watched that episode. Also, I don't remember if I mentioned this in my previous bonus episode, but a couple things about the Wonderkind. Still don't like the episode that much. The more I think about it, and I'll talk about this in the season 1 wrap-up episode I'm going to be doing, but the more I think about the Wonderkind, like, they could have got, like, it's such a frustrating episode, because if they're going to do an episode about a little kid as president, as being an allegory to Trump, like, why dumb it down so much? Why do so much to make it seem like he's really a kid? Like all of his campaign promises are just little kid promises and everything that no one's gonna care about, like no voting person is. But like, why not, go full Trump and do showcase how moronic Trump's appearances on TV in the lead up to the election was, before the election. I just think, I don't know. I just think the Wonderkind was a total missed opportunity. Anyway, I neglected to mention, or I didn't realize that the actor who played the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in a couple of scenes in that episode was Aaron Douglas, who played the chief in Battlestar Galactica. Totally blew my mind when I figured that out. And I still think he gives a great performance in the Wonderkind. In fact, his scene with Raph, where he's talking about, how everyone's happy, everyone loves their free video games, and it's a weird time to be talking treason. Like, for an episode that doesn't have like a Twilight Zone element, that moment is the closest we get to like actually like having like a Twilight Zone element of, I almost said Twilight Zone enema, Twilight Zone element of like some kind of fantastical or science fiction thing. Anyway, so that was cool. And just shout out to Aaron Douglas, because he was great in that scene. Also, there is a Busy Bee Diner cup in the debate prep scene. So there was an Easter egg that I missed. And then finally, regarding 6 Degrees of Freedom, I did not realize, or had no idea. I heard this on another podcast. I can't remember what it was. But oh man, I really wish I would have remembered what it was. I think it may have been the Fifth Dimension, like the original Fifth Dimension podcast. Anyway, they pointed out that the crew member character names in 6 Degrees of Freedom were taken from season 1 of the original series Twilight Zone episode I Shot an Arrow into the Air. In that episode, that episode, which has a lot of similarities to 6 Degrees of Freedom, has several astronaut characters that are named Donlin, Pearson, Langford, and Brandt. And those all correspond to 4 of the 5 characters in 6 Degrees of Freedom. The only one that wasn't in the episode, or wasn't given a name that correlated to that episode of the original series, was Ray Tanaka, played by Jessica Williams. I'm not sure, and I don't know if Ray Tanaka is some other kind of reference, but yeah, so that was an interesting connection to I Shot an Arrow into the Air. And if you, for whatever reason, haven't seen that episode, I Shot an Arrow into the Air, go check it out. It's season 1 of the original series. Very good episode. I really enjoyed that one. Yeah, so having said all of that, let's go ahead and go into Not All Men. I'm actually very excited to talk about this episode. So, plot summary, according to CBS All-Access, is a meteor shower spreads infection across an entire town, affecting some of the inhabitants more than others. So, talent rundown for Not All Men. This episode stars Tessa Farmiga as Annie Miller. She is, of course, she's the younger sister of Vera Farmiga, who's well known from the Conjuring movies, Bates Motel, all that. Tessa Farmiga is a mainstay of the American Horror Story television franchise. She was also recently, I think it was last year, in The Nun, which was a spin-off of the Conjuring universe movies. The Nun wasn't good. It really wasn't. It just felt kind of lifeless, but she did fine in it. And then she was also recently, last year as well, she was in an independent drama called What They Had, which was at Heartland Film Festival last year, which is a film festival here in Indianapolis that I cover on Obsessive Viewer. I didn't get a chance to see it, but it got huge acclaim around the festival circuit. I think it may have been like a Sundance darling or something, but it is currently available to stream on Amazon Prime. Again, that's called What They Had, and Tessa Farmiga has at least some kind of role in it. She's not a feature, like she's not like it's not a leading role. I think she just has like a supporting role. But if you want to check her out in a movie that has a lot of good buzz around it, check out What They Had on Amazon Prime. Co-starring as Martha is Rhea Seehorn, and she's appeared in several episodes of Veep, which I think just ended its run, and she was also in, or is in, I don't know, I don't watch the show, Better Call Saul as Kim Wexler. I watched the first season of Better Call Saul. It was okay. I love Breaking Bad, but just I didn't really care about Better Call Saul. So anyway, Rhea Seehorn also was in Franklin and Bash for a number of episodes. And then in addition to the cast, co-starring as Mike is Ike Barinholtz, who I am a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of Ike Barinholtz. He was on Mad TV for a number of years, starting in 2002, along with Jordan Peele, of course. But I first noticed Ike Barinholtz when he was he was a total scene stealer in The Mindy Project, which I don't remember how many seasons he was on. I only watched like the first 2 seasons of that show, or 3 seasons. But he was a scene stealer, and he was hilarious in every single scene. And he's fantastic. Since then, he has had a huge career in comedy. He's done kind of supporting roles in Neighbors and Neighbors 2. He was also in Blockers, which was one of my favorite movies of last year. Seriously, if you want to see a teen sex comedy from the perspective of parents who are trying to stop the sex from the teens, check out Blockers. It's surprisingly poignant and surprisingly progressive and sex positive and everything. It's a really great comedy. I loved it. I've seen it probably like half a dozen times at this point. Ike Barinholtz also wrote, produced, directed, and starred in last year's The Oath, which actually has a bit of a Twilight Zone feel to it. It's kind of the plot summary, according to IMDb, is: in a politically divided America, a man struggles to make it through the Thanksgiving holiday without destroying his family. So in this scenario, or in this world, Ike Barinholtz is a very outspoken person against the current administration in the world of the movie. And kind of the overarching thing about the entire country in The Oath is that the president has instituted a loyalty oath for all of the citizens. So people who sign the oath get perks and tax rebates and stuff, a bunch of nonsense. And it's it causes a rift between the family at Thanksgiving. It's pretty good. I thought it was okay overall. It's kind of a mix of comedy, drama, and thriller. And it goes to some unexpected places. So I thought it was just okay, but I respect him so much for making it. Like I said, he wrote, produced, directed, and starred in it. It's so cool to see kind of more supporting-ish actors use their star to, their rising star to fund and create something themselves, all facets of it. I just think that that's really admirable. Rounding out the cast, for this episode is Luke Kirby as Dylan. He was recently this year in M. Night Shyamalan's Glass. He has also appeared on Amazon Prime's The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which I've heard great things about. He's also been on HBO's The Deuce, and he was also recently, I think this is last year as well, in another indie drama, Little Woods. He had a supporting role, which also was at Heartland Film Festival. It's weird. Little Woods and What They Had, did not see either one of them, but I covered the film festival, so that says more about me, I think. I don't know. But anyway, Luke Kirby also had recurring role on Rectify, which I think was on Sundance TV, which is apparently a channel I didn't know existed. And then rounding out his credits, he was also in one episode of the Canadian Police Procedural... the Canadian SWAT Team procedural, oh my god, I can't say that word, procedural, there we go, drama Flashpoint, which I'm going to go ahead and just shoehorn in a plug for Obsessive Viewer, but me and my friend Kirsten, who is a recurring co-host on Obsessive Viewer, we're doing this little project where we are swapping TV shows for each other. So every now and then we'll get together, watch an episode or two of specific TV shows, that like one that I picked for her and one that she picked for me. Currently, we're going through the first seasons of Flashpoint, and that's her show that she picked for me, and I'm forcing her to watch Lost, which is one of my favorite shows. So anyway, check that out, obsessiveviewer.com. Finally, rounding out Luke Kirby's credits, I want to just mention that I know him best from the movie Take This Waltz. This movie came out, I don't remember when it came out, like 2000, I don't know, late, like before 2010, I think. I don't know. But anyway, really incredible, like romantic drama. Also co-stars, Seth Rogen, who is going to be in the season finale of the Twilight Zone. Anyway, Take This Waltz is incredible. It's about like human, like it tells just a unique story about a human attraction, and it's very like I don't know, it kind of messed me up a little bit. As a fan of like rom-coms, Take This Waltz, which is a romantic drama that's about like kind of forbidden attraction, but not romanticizing it. Like just having, it's such an incredible movie. Watch Take This Waltz, please. Okay, so that got away from me. Writer for this episode was Heather Ann Campbell, who previously wrote 6 Degrees of Freedom, and I mentioned some of her credits in the last bonus episode, I believe. But I do want to mention, in addition to the stuff that I referenced in 6 Degrees of Freedom, she also was a writer for The Eric Andre Show. Finally, director for this episode is Christina Cho. She, between 2005 and 2011, she directed several short films that, some of which I think were pretty highly acclaimed. But in last year, she wrote and directed a film called Nancy, which I haven't seen, but it is available on Amazon Prime. The plot summary has me very intrigued. The plot of Nancy is, according to IMDb, Nancy becomes increasingly convinced she was kidnapped as a child. When she meets a couple whose daughter went missing 30 years ago, reasonable doubts give way to willful belief. Like I said, Christina Cho wrote and directed that film. It is on Amazon Prime. It's called Nancy. I am going to hopefully check it out at some point when I don't have tons of podcasting I have to do. That is all my own doing. So just to be clear. So, let's talk about Not All Men. This is a review that I've been looking forward to, and I probably have more notes about this episode than I have any other episode of this season of The Twilight Zone. So, with that in mind, my initial thoughts on Not All Men is that I really liked the concept of the episode, and I was so certain that the alt-right Trump supporter viewers who've been kind of having a field day with trashing the new Twilight Zone for its social justice warrior messages or whatever, its progressive politics and everything, I'm so sure that they will have or are having a field day hating on this episode. But I appreciate the story it tells, the perspective it takes, and the conversation that it should, in theory, bring out among people. However, in my notes I put, it really shits the bed in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So let me go into my review of Not All Men. So right off the bat, the first image we see is the tank of water, or the tank of the water cooler at Annie's office. And that's kind of preparing us for the misdirection that there's something in the water from the meteorites. And we're introduced to Annie, who she has like a copy of The Art of War on her desk, kind of, I guess, to signal us that she's really a quote-unquote job's worth, as mentioned by Dylan later. So basically, she just takes her job very seriously. And then as we're kind of going through these shots, like, of her desk and everything, we're overhearing parts of a conversation on a phone. But before we get to that, we do get a close-up shot of a Post-it note that's on her computer monitor that says, "Call Dr. Romero at 10:15." And I kind of wonder if Dr. Romero is a reference to George Romero, which would be kind of fitting since the nature of this episode is very much kind of zombie movie influenced to an extent. And there's also our 10:15 reference this episode. And I like the subtlety of that. I don't even know if I'd say subtlety, because it's, it's in the full frame of it, but it's just it's not tied to the plot or anything. It's just set dressing. It's just there for a second and then it's gone. And I had this theory that I forgot to mention when I reviewed 6 Degrees of Freedom, but I came up with this ridiculous theory that it's more wishing than anything, because there's no way in hell that this is going to happen. But I had this weird theory that I tweeted about at OV Anthology Pod regarding the recurrence of 10:15 in almost every episode. I just think it would be really cool if, like, what if all the references to 10:15 were winks at the audience, hinting at something special on October 15th. So my rationale is, think of, like, Doctor Who and, really British shows are what's most common with it, but having like Christmas episodes or Christmas specials. Like Doctor Who is famous for having like a Christmas special, I think, almost every year. I haven't watched Doctor Who in several years, but, just one-off Christmas specials. And how cool would it be if, like, the 10:15 references were just nods to what would turn out to be a special surprise Halloween episode of the Twilight Zone that would surprise drop on October 15th. Again, it would never happen. Like, that is never, there is no chance that is what the recurrence of 10:15 is. There's no way that's what, the importance of 10:15 is. But I just think, in theory, that would be so cool. Like, how awesome would that be? I don't know, but regarding the 10:15 reference, I do like the idea of each season kind of establishing some strange sequence of numbers and then having running Easter eggs throughout each episode. Like, each season would have a different set of numbers. I just think that would be kind of fun. Just, I don't know, kind of fun. It would kind of take away from, not take away, but it would kind of, introduce some change to, well, I mean, I guess this is all stuff that's happened this season too, but like, it's a good, like, counterbalance to all of the references to the original series and everything. All the freaking Whipple, references we get. Yeah. So anyway, Annie's on a phone call with Phil, who we meet later. And this entire first scene is really magnificent at setting up the kind of lack of gender equality in the workplace. So Annie's phone call, she's kind of being talked down to, in a sense, about this assignment that she's been given at work. And she says that she just wasn't sure if he wants her to work it because she's only been there a couple months. And Phil says it isn't rocket science, which that alone isn't necessarily like a gender thing. It just establishes how stressful the job is for Annie and kind of just introduces us to this whole, like, okay, she doesn't get treated like an equal per se. So it's not necessarily like a gender equality thing. It's just like an establishment of, okay, Annie is in a job that is high stress, and she is not talked to as necessarily a peer, or her boss is a little overbearing. That's how I would say it. So, immediately after that, Dylan comes up, and that's our introduction to Luke Kirby, and he tells her that he overhears the conversation, and he says, you don't have to say yes to every assignment that Phil gives you. And she explains that that she just doesn't want to seem like she's not a team player. And she says that, she kind of just throws in there that she's in charge of setting up the placebos for a test that they're about to start. And it's like medicated lip balm is what it was. And that's an interesting bit of foreshadowing, since the meteorites are placebos, spoiler alert. So Dylan's immediate response to this is he just says, I'll talk to Phil, like very sternly, very quickly, and very directly. And she says no, no, you don't have to do that. But just the fact that he says, I'll talk to Phil, it's got this like soft misogyny underlining it. Like his reaction, like in his, the subtext of that is like him saying, I'll talk to Phil is the equivalent of him saying, I can see this woman is struggling, so I, a man, will get it fixed. And I just really like the subtlety of that. Like, to be frank, the show it's had some subtle things, some subtle kind of underlying kind of qualities to the messages and themes that it's been portraying. But this is like really well done dialogue, and it carries throughout like 3/4 of the episode. So I do want to highlight here, because this is going to be kind of a good entry point to one of my big issues with the episode, is that as Dylan is talking to Annie, there's a woman that's working at a cubicle in the background that the camera focuses on when Dylan says that he'll talk to Phil. Not sure what that was about. According to IMDb, it looks like maybe her character's name is Monica Jones. But, I mean, she's not in the episode. Like, it's just, that's the only scene. And, like, I don't know, the camera, like, pays special attention to her. And, I don't know, maybe there was a deleted scene or an entire subplot that was deleted. And, like, that kind of feeling of kind of anachronistic kind of mistakes or anachronistic quality, or inconsistent, really, is that it's kind of a running issue throughout the entire episode. And I'll get to more of that later, but like here, it's like, it's kind of jarring. Yeah, so I just thought that was kind of odd. So Dylan then asks Annie out to watch the meteor shower, and he's a little pushy about it, but Annie eventually accepts. And, yeah, so we get that introduction. So Annie, the next scene is Annie arriving at Dylan's house. She checks her makeup and everything. So this moment where they're watching the meteor shower, first of all, dude has lobsters and wine. Like, he's kind of going all out. And I think it's kind of funny. Well, okay. He's going all out. So I think that that's interesting. Or whatever. But, after that, like a few minutes into the scene, I think it's kind of funny how like and this is prefaces by saying that this is totally nitpicking, did not detract from the episode for me, but it just felt kind of just goofy that, it was like the visual effects clearly weren't considered for this scene, or the visual effects were developed independent of this scene. That's my theory. Because Dylan asks if she saw the meteorite, and she walks over, and as she's staring into the sky, she says, where? At the exact moment, like, a bunch of them are clearly visible in the sky. And, Dylan kind of moves in closer to her, and he politely asks if it's okay for him to put his arm around her. And I thought that was an interesting moment and kind of sweet. And like at that moment, we don't have the kind of tense foreboding yet. So the meteorites are flying across the sky, and it's clear immediately that they're kind of crashing down. So one hits the water tower, and then one flies overhead. I do like that it hits the water tower, because I like that kind of further kind of subtly leads us to think that the water is really going to be contaminated. So Dylan and Annie go to where one of the meteorites fell to Earth. And okay, so Dylan picking up the meteorite just freaked me out in and of itself. I'm fascinated by space. I love it. I love the idea of space travel and like the truth is out there, all that nonsense. I'm fascinated by that. But there is no freaking way I would ever pick up something that I literally watched fall to the Earth from space. And like, there's no way I would do that. No matter how badly I want superpowers, there's no way that I'll pick that up. So as they're walking away, I did notice that the kind of ambient noises in that scene kind of sounded a lot like the, beeps, I guess you would say, of J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies. And that may also be in the original series too. I don't remember, but I equate them to, the Abrams Star Trek movies. It's kind of a combination of like the ambient noise and the frog ribbiting and everything. It just really gave me the flashbacks to the sound design in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies. So Annie and Dylan are back at Dylan's house. He's got a fire going, the wine's pouring, and he starts playing a Lionel Richie record. Which, at this point, nothing horrible has happened. Like, at this point, they are just on a normal date. And I have to ask, I'm kind of curious. At this point, does Dylan have game? Or is he, really laying it on just a little bit too thick? Like, I genuinely don't know if we're supposed to think he's kind of suave or whatever, or if we're supposed to take it as like really you're playing Hello by Lionel Richie. Come on, dude. I don't know if that's supposed to be too much or if it's supposed to communicate that he's got, that he's got game, I guess would be the only way to describe that. So he sits down on the couch and he tells her that he's been wanting to ask her out for a while and that she's really cute when she's being a Jobsworth. And he mentions that a Jobsworth is where, she takes her job very seriously. And that's kind of more casual, misogyny. A running theme throughout this entire episode is that she's not taken seriously in the workplace. And even though he is complimenting her or in his own way kind of giving her a compliment or telling her that she's, cute, it's also at the expense of the underlying message being I don't take you seriously as an employee at the company that I work for as well. Because I just think I'm just completely taking just an objective view of your appearance and when you're, at work. So, that's kind of the start. And I love how smoothly the dynamic shifts in this scene. They start making out and then she stops it. But after that moment, that's when Luke Kirby's creepiness starts to subtly come out, and it grows as the scene progresses. He says that their night has been magical and cosmic and all that, and Annie is trying to politely end the evening. And here's what I love, this scene is what I love about this episode. It's boiled down, everything about the scene boiled down is the epitome of what I love about this episode. Because at this moment, this is a realistic depiction of the tension that builds in these types of situations. It's honestly, it's stuff that women go through, when dating in the real world. And as the episode demonstrates, it's often the man that comes out ahead in every kind of, intimidating encounter with dating. And there's a very real feeling of escalating tension throughout this scene in which you begin to legitimately fear for Annie's safety. And it's so well done and so, smooth in the way that it just escalates throughout the scene. And as the tension kind of mounts, there's this backtracking and gaslighting that Dylan does when he realizes that things aren't going to go the way that he expects them to. And I think that that's incredible. Kudos to the writing and kudos to Luke Kirby for being really disturbing in this scene. So, but what I mean by him backtracking and gaslighting Annie is that he, when he realizes that it's not going to happen, he says, wait, first he is, his Hail Mary is that he says, in the creepiest tone, he says, I'll do you first. And then almost immediately after that, he gets up and kind of advances on her and he's like, wait, did you think I was trying to fuck you? And it's just that type of backtracking and gaslighting and just walking back his actions is so just disturbing because it's with this intensity that's really potent. And I feel like this is just really strong dialogue because the pretense of their date just completely disappears. And this scene effortlessly transitions into a potentially dangerous situation between, and I put in my notes, between Annie and coworker McBlueballs. And I don't know. I just love how this scene is written. Annie is so obviously uncomfortable. And okay, let me backtrack. So, coworker McBlueballs, yes, he is upset. So, I love how the scene is written because at this moment, Annie is so obviously uncomfortable and somewhat threatened as well, yet she is constantly trying to be polite and courteous and non-confrontational. And this is despite the fact that his actions have directly made her uncomfortable, and he should, in that case, be, not a dick. So let me play a clip from this scene just to demonstrate what I'm referring to. So here's a clip from this.
You don't want to? What? You're not into it? I'll do you first.
I'm gonna head out.
Wait, what did I do wrong?
Nothing. You did nothing wrong.
Wait. Are you thinking I'm trying to fuck you? Right now?
Well, okay. No, but
Well, you're acting like I am.
Dylan, I'm not. I'm really not.
That kind of hurts.
Dylan, stop it. Everything's cool. I need you to listen to me. I really like you. And look, we work together. I want to see you again. It's just, what's the rush?
Okay, so yeah, just incredible writing and incredible acting from Tessa Farmiga and Luke Kirby. And what I want to say is so disturbing and so well demonstrated here is that this scene alone isn't a Twilight Zone moment. It's like a real experience for many women in the world, like in our country, and specifically, like the dating world is filled with this type of thing. And like I have a lot of like female friends who have had like these types of experiences and everything. And I've heard just horror stories, about this type of thing. And it's like, it is legitimately scary for women dating out there. So it's crazy. And it's such a well done scene. So Annie leaves and she hears Dylan freak out, and like that puts this whole scene into an interesting perspective, and kind of makes it feel like up until the point where we get Peele's narration, like that portion of this episode feels like its own self-contained short film in and of itself. It has like a clear like progression of plot, and like just seeing him freak out and destroy like the record player and stuff as she's leaving is just like an interesting like pin on that moment, or in that like hypothetical short film. Just very well done. So then we get Peele's narration to bring us into the episode, and I'm going to play that here.
Meet Annie Miller. Annie has always seen the world as a place where she could maintain control if she just played by the rules. But tonight marks the beginning of a change, both in her and in the idyllic town she's always called home. On the eve of her sister's birthday, Annie will be forced to contend with an event well out of her control, and a simmering violence about to boil over into the Twilight Zone.
Okay, so, and of course, like I've said, I've complained before, and I'll complain next time, just the formulaic way that the narrations have kind of been written. Like, all I ask is that so it's been renewed for season 2. Hopefully if it gets more seasons, that would be great. But I would just hope that from now on, if they never start a narration with meet character name, I will be so happy with anything that they do. Because that gets so on my nerves, and I can't, like, it's not like, I shouldn't have this reaction to that. Like, I shouldn't feel that, like, annoyed by it, because it's essentially 3 words, that appear in, I think, like, maybe 4 or 5 of the 7 episodes that we were at this point. So ultimately it's not that big of a deal, but just the repetition of it is so like annoying, because I know that like a big part of the original series was just the interesting narration and the interesting writing in the narration. And also part of me just knows that like it's the beginning of the episode. Like, this is where you're trying to hook the audience in, and you're following this formula of writing the narration, and it just feels so formulaic and just lazy. I don't like it. So hopefully they kind of improve that in the next season. So after the opening credits, it's the next day, and we get Annie getting ready for work, and we have a radio that's giving us some exposition about the town's reaction to the meteorites. And that kind of brings up one of the failures of the episode as a whole, is that it doesn't adequately set up the town of Newbury for my tastes. Like, Peele references it as an idyllic town, and the radio host mentions the town by name, but we don't get much in the way of actually seeing the town and its inhabitants until all hell breaks loose. So at that moment, when everything is going crazy, it just doesn't feel like it's been properly set up. And like, I don't care about the town because I don't feel like a town has been introduced to me. I just feel like this is a general area near where Annie is. So the radio also, I didn't catch any like Easter eggs in the radio announcements or anything, but I did want to highlight that the radio references superstitions that are cropping up around the town, and it ends with the host saying that he got word from a local hospital that there was a baby born during the shower, and the parents are going to celebrate by, and then that's when it trails off. Like, even the closed captions don't have what he says, but it kind of sounds like he says they're going to eat something. And I kind of thought for a second, like, are they going to eat the baby? But my guess is, like, if I were to be hired to write the rest of that sentence, in the episode, my guess would be that he would be baptized, that the baby would be baptized in meteor water. That would be my guess. So, but the more important takeaway from this scene from the next day is that Annie notices that her arm is bruised from when Dylan grabbed her. And like, she just kind of looks at it in kind of horror. Like, it's kind of her processing, like, this thing happened to me last night. And she doesn't, like, as it's kind of hinted at later, she just doesn't know how to react to that, because it's a terrible experience, and she doesn't know how to respond to that. And it feels like such an authentic kind of reaction to that type of situation in the real world. And the next scene is her at work with long sleeves. And I just think that was just those like few seconds were just powerful, like, visuals, because, like, she's wearing long sleeves specifically because she's hiding bruises. And it's just such a tragic kind of thing, or such a sad thing. And it's especially, like, and this is me, maybe I'm projecting a little bit in this moment here, but, like, it's especially, like, sad, and it especially speaks volumes when you consider that it would be easy for him to argue that there was no assault or anything despite the bruises on her arm. Like, the way that the scene was constructed, and again, it is such an incredible sequence in this episode, but the way it's constructed is, like, you could see, like, the man of the scene being like, we made out a little bit. She didn't want to do it. She didn't want to do anything. I asked her if she wanted to reconsider, and then she left. And then now I'm on the market for a new record player. And, like, just that type of thing would just be like something people would go with, I would think. I don't know. So maybe I'm putting too much into that moment. But anyway, Annie gets to her desk, and Phil comes up, and that's our introduction to Phil, and he speaks somewhat condescendingly to her as he mentions that he is going to partner her up with Dylan on a project. And just, like, I love Tessa Farmiga's response to this. Like, her reaction is, like, so diplomatic and even-keeled, despite the fact that she's, like, horrified at at this shitty situation that's being made even shittier by this complete power imbalance that she has from a gender perspective. I just think that was just a really good scene. Then that was a quick scene, so we get to the yoga scene, I guess. And she's outside the yoga studio, and this is really the only scene that we get that establishes Newbury as a community, aside from being, like, filled with raving lunatics. And even then, like, our attention isn't on the nature of the town, or isn't on, like, oh, look at this quaint little town. It's more just our attention is driven toward the strange behavior of the men around Annie. And I just wish there was a little bit more world building to pay off the last act of the episode. As bonkers and ridiculous as the last act of the episode is, I feel like I would have maybe felt a little bit better about it if we had context for the town of Newbury. So some of the stuff that she sees, as she's kind of going to her car, is she sees this man that's putting his hand in his wife's back pocket, just squeezing her ass as they're walking outside of the yoga studio. And then, then there's a man struggling to get the straw in the cup, and that was pretty ridiculous and heavy-handed and stupid. Like, it's just a Neanderthal, like, oh, me put straw in cup, so me drink. And it's so dumb. I hated it. But Easter egg, that was a Busy Bee Diner cup. So there's that. And then there was a man that was struggling with the trunk that's a little bit crazy, but it's like, that fits a lot more than dumbass trying to put a straw in his cup. And then there was a guy that was honking for her to move. Like those, like the man with the trunk and the man trying to get her to move are a nice touch. And at this point, really, this episode could be viewed as completely straightforward in a sense. Like, Annie in this scene is dealing with the events of the night before with Dylan. And because of what happened, you could argue like her perception is heightened and everything makes her seem on edge. Like you could take away the meteor shower and the plotline of men going crazy and just see this as a woman who is still processing this, this dangerous situation she found herself in, just like 12 hours ago. By having this heightened sense of like the actions of men around her because she's, on edge because of what happened. Like you could read it that way, and it's still a really incredibly well drawn scene, despite the dumbass trying to get the straw in his cup. So she leaves, and we're introduced to Cole after that as she arrives at her sister's house. And so Cole is Annie's nephew. And it's a good scene. Like, there's some really good chemistry between the two actors here. And it was, although I will say, like, the writing suffered here because it was kind of hard for me to put together that he is Martha and Mike's son. Like, I feel like there's something missing there. Like he addresses her as Auntie Annie, but I'm like, that's all that we get from that. It's a weird disconnect there. I don't know. I just feel like it could have been made more clear that, he was the son of Martha and Mike. But yeah, so, and they have a cute, like, back and forth, like, Cole, he's like a 15-year-old kid, and he says that he wants to kick the guy's ass that got weird on her, and it's tongue-in-cheek, like she asks, like, why do you guys always want to kick ass? And then he's I love the way he says it, he's like, 'cause we're dudes, and it's really tongue-in-cheek and fun. Yeah, so then we get the dinner scene, and this is the introduction of Mike and Martha and Olivia, who is married to Phil. And so all of them are in attendance at this dinner. That is a birthday dinner for Martha. And so there is a goofy back and forth in this scene with Ike Barinholtz and Rhea Seehorn that I think is just super fun. Like, they go out of their way, like, they're a married couple in the scene, and they go out of the way to compliment each other and frequently say, I love you, and it's almost like they have, like, what I put into it is that I got the sense that they had, like, a rocky marriage and had to have, like, couples counseling at some point, and so that's why they're constantly reassuring each other of their love for each other, because that's what they were told to do in therapy. All that stuff that I just poured into the scene, there's none of that in the episode, but it's just, without that kind of idea or that read on it, it just sounds really bizarre the way that they behave. I just want to mention here, Ike Barinholtz is a freaking treasure. He's fantastic. I love Ike Barinholtz. He and Martha in this scene, he and Rhea Seehorn in the scene tell a story about Mike trying to talk to a chef in France. And, like, it's a cute back and forth, like, Martha's trying to finish his sentences, and he's like, oh, I love you, and all that. But then after the story, Annie mentions that, like, she's like, why didn't you just send Martha? And her French is amazing. And Mike says, that he couldn't have sent his wife into the lion's den or the den of Laos or something, I don't know. that is like a French restaurant. It's cute and lighthearted, but it's also in keeping with the overall theme of men talking down to women in their own unique ways, like this casual misogyny. And what's more interesting here, I would say, is Martha's response to that. Like, she says that Mike is her big, brave hero, so she's kind of complacent with the way things are because Mike's a good man, even though, like, this is very casual, like, subtle, like, misogyny, to an extent. And that's followed up with Phil getting called out by Olivia for mansplaining, the like correcting what the food was that they just ate or whatever. And in theory, I love that Phil gets called out for mansplaining by Olivia. But on one hand, the character, like, I love that in theory, as I said. The character kind of becomes one note throughout the episode. Like, that's all the character does in, like, the 3 or 4 scenes that he's in. And the comment about mansplaining itself feels just a little bit shoehorned in. Like, is he technically mansplaining? Because Mike is the one that brought up the eggplant tureen that he's talking about. Like, it's not like one of the women at the table said, like, oh, that's a really great, whatever, that's a really great hors d'oeuvre. And Mike's like, well, actually, this is actually that. It's like he's breaking a silence by, I genuinely don't see how that is, like what it is in the episode is mansplaining something. Like, I don't see how that is mansplaining, because I don't know. And I consider myself to be a feminist. I'm, whatever. But sometimes that kind of shutdown just bothers me. Like, in certain situations, like this one, the guy is just trying to make conversation about the food. Sure, it's obnoxious, it's dull, and of no interest to anyone, but just because he is a know-it-all doesn't mean he's mansplaining it, because he's not, like, it's not, like I said, it's not like one of the women at the table, like, tried to, like, comment on the food, and then he's just like, well, actually, it's this, and this is why I'm smarter than all the women. It's just more like, okay, Mike mentioned something about the food when Martha got the skillet, and now he's kind of following up on that, and he's getting called out for mansplaining. I don't know. I just felt like that was a little forced. But then as soon as she says that, Mike tells Phil to, quote unquote, get woke. And when I saw that scene, when I heard those 2 words, I feel like I could hear the heads of people who have at this point been hate watching the show, for its social justice warrior, like, tendencies and stuff. I feel like I could hear their heads exploding with anger. Because, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, kitschy to talk about being woke and everything and get woke. I don't know. It's played for kind of a laugh, but it's just like, I could hear the angry tweets, come in from, certain people who will watch this show. But then again, if you're 7 episodes into this season and you're still shocked by the tone of the message and the way that the politics lean in a certain direction, then it's kind of your own fault for still watching at this point. So, okay, so I think Martha asks Phil about Annie's new job, because Annie is working at the company that Phil works at, and he is her supervisor, as it's kind of implied. And at this moment, I thought this was really another example of really strong writing, because Phil refers to her saying that she's I think he says something to the effect of that her being the best entry-level girl they've had. And it's just, I love the way that this recurs throughout the episode. Like, people referring to Annie as girl rather than, like, woman or person. It's just another, like, escalation of this casual misogyny that's occurring, like, that's rampant throughout this episode. And I just love that, how casual it is and how just naturalistic it is, that he's just like, oh yeah, she's a good girl at this job. It's just like, it's so kind of borderline demeaning and just condescending, and just like, it shows that there's no respect for her as, a member of his team and everything. So, I just love how that recurs throughout the episode, and I'll point out the other times that it is brought up. Another example of casual misogyny that is developed well in this episode is here in that scene. Phil mentions teaming her up with Dylan, and when he mentions that, he mentions like, oh, Dylan is the best project manager that they have, and he's going to team her up with him on this project, and that's immediately viewed as a potential romantic connection and not at all about her career with the company. And I just thought that was really interesting in terms of just writing and commentary on women in the workplace. So at this point, dinner is interrupted by the angry neighbor with the lawnmower. And I'm going to talk about some issues I have here in a bit, but I do want to mention that when they go outside and the neighbor is having kind of a temper tantrum over the lawnmower, Phil starts mansplaining the smell and look of the water. Again, it's kind of funny. He's a know-it-all, and that's what he does. But it is so one note throughout this episode. Like, every scene he's in, it's like, well, actually, this is this, and this, and it's just so, it feels so goofy and weird. But Martha mentions here that they have to leave because, quote, Robin is going to be waiting. And I feel like that was just really clunky for my taste. Like, suddenly all the women at this dinner have entirely different plans from the dinner. Like, I wish there was something to establish that earlier in the episode. And again, there's the awkward I love yous between Mike and Martha that feel kind of forced. And this is where I kind of wondered, kind of similar to the woman in the cubicle in the opening scene, I wonder if there's some kind of deleted or extended scene or entirely different subplot for this episode, because the women all leave suddenly, and then Mike reiterates that the water stinks, and the neighbor gets really testy, and then the scene just ends. Like, there's no, like, that's all we get with the neighbor and everything, and it's over. So, and then it cuts to a bar where Martha, Annie, Olivia, and who I'm assuming is Robin, are at, like, a bar having kind of a ladies' night. So, the birthday dinner that, like, they had, like, a gathering for Martha is suddenly a ladies' night outing with her and her friends, and it just, I don't know, it was jarring. I was like, wait, like, how did we get from there to here? And it just felt like it was very sloppy for my taste. It really took me a second to kind of catch up and get back into the episode. So, at the bar, Robin is telling the story about her and her husband having sex in their car, and it visibly makes Annie uncomfortable, and like, she doesn't want to, talk about that kind of thing because she just had a traumatic experience the night before. As far as Robin telling that story, I don't quite get that. Like, I think Robin is saying that her husband kept asking if it was okay for them to be having sex in the car. And I don't know what that is supposed to be conveying, if anything. I just felt like that was weirdly out of place. I don't know. So they see a group of men at the bar being loud and disruptive. And they point out that one of them is Zeke the Geek, who was picked on profusely throughout high school. And I think it's Martha says, like, some things never change, and, like, he's being goaded into doing shots with pieces of the meteorite in it. And okay, that's really dumb. Like, that is the dumbest thing. One of the dumbest things in this episode. But sadly, it's also kind of believable. Like, I could see, like, super, like, masculine men or people that are just really crazy, taking this experience and being like, oh, I'm gonna do shots with this piece of rock from outer space. It's just, I don't know, it's super dumb, but slightly believable to an extent. But yeah, I do think that it's weird that all of this happens, like, immediately after the meteor shower. And there's an argument to be made that, well, the episode is kind of seeding the idea that, okay, the meteorites are causing this disturbing behavior. But, obviously at the end it's revealed that they're not. So it's just kind of, it's weird in that context of the whole episode. So then, to kind of make matters worse, they see Dylan at the bar. Or at the restaurant. It looks like he's kind of chatting up these two women at a table, so he's, unfazed by the events of the previous night. And Annie gets very uncomfortable, and I don't know, Martha gets all girly and excited. And I thought that was really interesting as a narrative device or characterization, because she's already been established as a woman who is kind of complacent with this type of kind of casual, like, not, I guess I've been saying casual misogyny, but, you know, like just the station of women in life in this culture and everything. Like, she's fine with it. And she, I think someone else at the table suggests inviting Dylan over, and Annie just strongly objects. And Martha says, "Come on, I bet he's great in bed." And Annie says, "Not everything is about sex." And Martha's like, "Well, it isn't." And it's just like, I get that. Like, as a dude, I've had conversations with like friends of mine that basically boil down to this, like, "Oh, I bet she's great in bed." And it's like, okay, fine. Not everything's about sex though. And like, I've had that exact conversation with people. So when they're like objectifying, you know, women and everything. So Annie goes outside and she sees Cole and his boyfriend Steve. And again, I don't think there's no indication of who Steve is. There's Steve had not been referenced at all earlier at all in the episode. But Annie says, "Oh, this must be Steve," as if we know, like, there's a Steve. And it's a minor nitpick, but it's also indicative of kind of the bigger issues I have with the episode. But I feel like there were some very sloppy cuts in the editing of this episode as a whole. And maybe the story lost some of its cohesiveness as a result. For an example, this whole scene, it feels just really sloppy. Like, Cole and Steve are getting beer. Annie is kind of playing like the cool aunt to them. And like, I have to gripe about the writing here specifically. Like, here's a clip of what they say, the back and forth that they have with Annie and Cole and Steve.
Bold move. You know, your mom's right inside.
Yeah, just for a friend.
You know how many times your mom and I use that line? I won't tell if you won't.
Hey, thanks for being cool.
Just don't drink in here.
Nah, we're hanging on my dad's boat, the Achilles, down by the docks.
I wish I was 15. Be safe, okay?
Yeah. Bye, Annie.
So I don't like that, because Annie tells them not to drink it there, yet she's outside of a clearly like restaurant bar. Like, there's no way these 15-year-old kids can go into the bar to drink the beer that they have because they are 15 years old. And then like Steve just offers up information that is not pertinent to the conversation. He's just like, "Oh, don't worry, we're going to go to the docks," which is fine. But then he's like, "Oh, we're going to drink on my dad's boat, the Achilles. It's at the dock." Like, oh my God, he's just offering this information specifically because it's going to come into play later. And it's just like, it's so sloppy and just awkward. So we get back into the bar, and the guys are still shooting the stones, and Zeke is being cut off by the bartender. And the women are watching, and like, they're commenting on how, oh, it's so sad when men can't hold their booze. And I want to mention, I didn't realize this until I was listening to the episode today at work. I think the bartender offers Zeke a fresh glass of water on the house. And like, this just a really weird, like, what place charges for water? I don't know. That just kind of stood out to me, and I was like, what? But, anyway, moving forward, that's neither here nor there. It's a nitpick, but Annie asks, like, referring to the men in the bar, like, what's wrong with them? And Martha replies that it's, quote unquote, just assholes being assholes. And that's after she comments on how sad it is when people can't hold their liquor. And I just, again, Martha is just this kind of complacent person in this episode. Like, she's like, okay, well, it's just men being men. It's, you know, it's just what they do. But then a fight breaks out among the men, and Annie tells them that they should leave. She's starting to get freaked out. And then Zeke freaks out, to kind of instigate everything in the bar. or escalate everything in the bar. And honestly, this is where the episode really kind of like really starts to lose me just a little bit. Like that close up of Zeke looking like his head is about to explode comes across as so silly and over the top in an episode that in 19 minutes has very well established itself as a serious look at casual and not so casual misogyny and the effect of sexual assault on women and the lasting effect that it has on them in a world where that's the kind of dominated by men and toxic masculinity. Like, it's a shift that I don't feel really fits with what has come before it. Like this, just the shot of Zeke just like looking like he's constipated as hell trying to drop a deuce in the middle of this restaurant. It's so weird. And I don't know. And so the fighting escalates and all the men join in. They all look like zombies with a hint of like kind of roid ragey vibes, which I think is also kind of why, the post-it note in the opening shot had Dr. Romero, not Dr. Romano, Dr. Romero, because it's very much, reminiscent of, zombie movies and everything. So then as everything is breaking out in the bar, here we get this quick shot of a man in a red hat leaving the building. And it's very obviously supposed to be a MAGA hat. And I really like this little Easter egg. It's quick, it's subtle, at least by this show's standards. And I don't know, it worked for me in this moment at least. I'll get to more of that later because again, kind of a running theme. And I hate to say this because I've been somewhat of a champion of this show for better or worse throughout the season, but it's indicative of why the show, like this series does not know how to just let something breathe. Like it has to double down on so much stuff, including these Easter eggs. It's like, I don't know. It just seems like in the writer's room or in the production, like in the editing bay of the episodes, it's like they're saying like, oh, that's a really good Easter egg here. That'll really be cool. Let's go ahead and duplicate this numerous times throughout the episode, or let's put this in a full, let's put this front and center in a wide or a tight shot where it's taking over the entire frame so that we know that they don't miss it. Like, we're in the era of streaming. We watch these episodes numerous times. Like, just let something breathe. Let people pick it up. Let people discuss these Easter eggs for people who don't catch them the first time they see them or anything. Like, there's no need to double down on them and just really shoehorn in these Easter eggs that are just so prominently done, in each episode. So anyway, Annie and Martha leave the restaurant, and that was also problematic to me because, okay, Olivia and Robin stay behind to pick up the check. It's a very quick line, like, oh, we'll get the check and everything. And then Annie and Martha leave. And again, this is a big complaint I have with this episode, the structure, the production of it and everything. I have no way to confirm what I'm about to say at all. Like, I have no idea if this is what the case is. This is strictly my interpretation of the way this episode was presented in its final form. This whole ladies' night bar scene feels so much like it was either something that was reshot and added to the episode when it was almost done, or part of an entirely like alternate subplot that they spliced in, or it was something to replace an alternate subplot that they decided to cut out. And here's what I mean by that. Or like these are the reasons why I feel that way. The women suddenly say they're going to a bar to meet up with Robin when they're outside with the neighbor, when their birthday dinner was just interrupted. Like, it comes out of nowhere. It seems like, okay, maybe it's just like very quick, like insert shot for a reshoot, to kind of shoehorn in this alternate subplot that they have, or this subplot that they're replacing for whatever reason. And then the reference to Zeke the Geek in the bar feels inconsequential because he doesn't really show up anywhere the rest of the episode except for one spot that I think is him. I'll definitely talk about it, because it was ridiculous. And then also Luke Kirby's appearance in the scene in the restaurant or in the bar feels like they had to shoot his scenes separately. Like, it seems like those were pickup shots that, like, cause there's, like, you don't have any dialogue from him. It's shot from away, from another side of the room. There are no other, like, featured actors in any of the scenes that he's in. Like, they don't share the screen. It's just all from the viewpoint of the women at the table. And he doesn't interact with anyone. Like, there's no dialogue because we only see him interacting with, like, extras. And it just feels like just really out of place in the grand scheme of things. And then also, so again, to reiterate an earlier scene, Annie tells Cole and Steve not to drink it in there, implying that these two 15-year-olds are going to take beer into a bar. And then finally, only Annie and Martha leave the bar because the rest of the episode is them escaping from this crazy night. All of that just all together just feels really sloppy and just, it didn't work for me. It just felt really out of place and jarring to me. So as they're leaving the restaurant, they run into Perry outside the restaurant. And he says, "Hey, aren't you that girl from work? It's me, Perry." And again, the reoccurrence of, men identifying Annie as girl is just great. I love that as a recurring element throughout the episode. And apparently, the black leather jacket that Perry is wearing is a reference to the, I think, season 5 episode of the original Twilight Zone, Black Leather Jackets. Obviously I haven't gotten to that episode yet, so I don't know. I think I just saw that in passing, that it was like on like a Reddit thread or something, that it was a reference to that. And I guess the design on the helmet is a reference to either that episode or a different episode. But again, I haven't gotten that far in the original series, so, yeah, hopefully I didn't butcher that. So, so anyway, Perry flips out, and I like the escalation in that scene as well. Like, Annie and Martha rush past him, and he just loses his shit. And I'll play a clip here.
Real fucking polite. What, you think you're so hot? Fucking bitch. Stop ignoring me, you fucking bitch!
I think that this time, I like this because it's kind of, a little bit of variety to an extent to this kind of casual misogyny, and it's escalating the overall depiction of misogyny in this episode. And this time it's kind of a play on catcalling to an extent, and to in a more broad extent, like broader terms, it's also kind of commenting on, women being just borderline harassed with unwanted attention just because they're women. And there's this unspoken, expectation from men that, okay, because they're a woman that they are attracted to, they are required to speak to them, which is not the case, and has not been the case in my experience. Anyway, Jesus. So in the car, Martha's, off the bat, she's making excuses for what's happened. She excuses the men's behavior because they had too much to drink, and then, in a kind of fascinating kind of additional dialogue, or next line of dialogue, she starts to say that the women had too much to drink also. Like, she's blaming herself for the actions of the men, and it's just really in keeping with her character as this kind of complacent woman in this society that's dominated by men. That is the worst time for me to have my voice crack. So Perry starts chasing them, and it's intense. Like, it's not that it doesn't fit. It almost feels like a filler tension scene. It's more surface level tension, and I'm fine with that. It's okay. I don't really understand why Martha is directing, Annie on where she should turn and everything, because it's not like Annie, like, it would be different if Annie was, like, it was established that Annie was in town from out of town or something like that, but as Peele noted in the opening narration, like, it's her, like, she's lived there forever, so I don't know. So they get to the house and the gate won't open, but they have effectively lost Perry, and we get a really good scene between Annie and Martha in the car, because Annie lets slip that something happened with Dylan, and Martha gets super, like, defensive, and she hears her out, and she's trying to, like, get to the bottom of what happened, and at this moment, it's kind of Annie's turn to blame herself for the actions of men. Like, she says that she must have given him some confusing vibe, and then he just got fucking nuts. And I don't know, just like that scene in the car between Martha and Annie about Dylan is just so strong and so well written, because Martha understands what she's going through. Like, she explains, like, I had a lot of bad dates, in italics, before I met Mike. And it's there's so much subtext to that, and it's so palpable. I think that's the second time I use that word. Anyway, also kind of a strange motif throughout the season that I'm finding here is people instantly believing others in the Twilight Zone. We had, previous to this, we had Joe Beaumont telling Justin Sanderson in Nightmare at 30,000 Feet that he believed him. And we also had, Uncle Neil, I think, in Replay, telling, was it Nina? That he believed her about the camcorder and everything. Also, in a different extent, in a different context, we had, in 6 Degrees of Freedom, we had, oh god, the surgeon, what was her name? We had her telling Pearson that she believed him, and to get to a seat when all hell was breaking loose on the flight deck. So it's an interesting kind of motif throughout the season, and maybe I'll put together I'll after the season ends, I'll put together, some notes for my season review episode that I'm really hoping I can get Tiny on board for, but I don't know if he, will have time to watch the entire season by then. So we'll figure it out. So, as I said before, Martha mentions that before Mike, she had a lot of shitty dates, and Annie kind of mentions, Annie, like, kind of lets it go that she thinks that it's the meteorites that's causing it. And I really like Tessa Farmiga's performance here, because we've been with her this whole time, and she has been considering the events the whole night, but she instantly realizes how stupid she sounds when she says that it's the meteorites that are causing it. And I feel like that's just a very natural, organic response to it, because it is ridiculous. Like, these characters are in the Twilight Zone, but it's like they are thinking about the situation. They're kind of pointing out that, like, oh, I think it's the meteorites, but no, that's ridiculous. I love that. So, after their little heart-to-heart in the car, they see that Perry comes back, and the episode kind of turns into a legit horror movie for just a moment. So they rush inside and tell Mike. Mike runs out, after snapping at Martha. He runs out and he beats Perry to death. And it's very aggressive and very brutal. Annie tells Martha to call 911, but she can't get through, so it's evident that it's happening all over town at that moment. So Annie locks the door. Then we get Mike returning to the house, and Annie tries to convince Martha that Mike is sick. So Martha's in denial, and she ends up opening the door to let Mike in, but no one's there. And that's, like, the episode has turned into a home invasion movie or a Scream-esque slasher flick, and even the score sounds very reminiscent of Scream in this particular moment, which is no surprise considering that Marco Beltrami, one of the co-composers in this season of The Twilight Zone, composed the score for all 4 Scream movies. So I thought that was a nice nod. Scream is one of my favorite, like, horror movies ever. As noted, I think I've probably said it on this podcast before, it's the movie that kind of made me love movies. So Mike kind of appears behind them, and I love Ike Barinholtz in this scene. Like, he's incredible. Like, he says, like, oh, you should have seen me. Just like this kind of bravado of this macho kind of manly kind of thing. And so they follow him into the kitchen, and here's where Ike Barinholtz just kills it. Like, I haven't really been thinking in terms of, like, recycling actors throughout the life of the Twilight Zone. Like, I really love John Cho's performance in The Wonderkind, and I like Tessa Farmiga in this episode. And I like Ike Barinholtz as well. Like, I would love to see these actors appear in other episodes as different characters, obviously. But anyway, he mentions that it felt good letting that guy have it. It felt really good. I'm going to play a clip from this scene because Ike Barinholtz is so creepy and intense. So here's a clip from this scene with Ike Barinholtz.
Mike, just put it down and wait.
You know, I just saved you two from a fucking psychopath. How about a little thank you?
Okay, Mike, you don't have to yell.
I'm not yelling! You know, maybe next time you don't lead a lunatic to my house. 2 girls drinking at a fucking bar? You're asking for it.
Asking for it.
Don't interrupt me! I am done with you interrupting me! Every time I have a fucking story, you gotta open that mouth of yours! I'm trying to keep you safe!
And I love it so damn much. It's just so intense, so creepy, so eerie. And it's just so unsettling. And it's also just kind of sad to see Martha complying to her obviously deranged husband to come like closer to blow out the candles. And just the whole scene again is just so great and terrifying, and the escalation it's much quicker and much overt than like the escalation in the scene with Dylan at the beginning of the episode. But we're about 30 minutes into the or 26 minutes into the episode, so obviously that escalation has to be quicker, to the detriment of the end of the episode, but we'll get to that. But yeah, it's just so great. And when he says like 2 girls drinking in a fucking bar, you're asking for it. Like that, I don't know, it's a little bit on the nose, but Barinholtz sells it for me so well. Like I just love his performance in this scene. But here's something that I flat out did not like in this episode. So Mike loses his cool and he chases Annie through the house with a knife. What I didn't like about this is that in an episode that is so focused on providing an authentic look at like the women's perspective of like what it's like to be a woman in a male-dominated toxic masculinity world, that is in the terms of this episode becoming more and more heightened as a heightened reality. It does such a great job of showcasing like what it's like to be a woman in this scenario and showing the audience what it's like to experience certain interactions and survive disturbing events. Yet Annie does the most tropish thing imaginable, and she falls down while being chased by a madman with a knife. And it feels like the episode does such a great job with her characterization, but just has to put in the heroine of the story acting like a standard final girl in a horror movie. It just felt so wrong to me and anachronistic to the tone of the episode, even though the tone of the episode is becoming more and more heightened and ridiculous with all of the violence and everything. In this moment, it just felt like the dumb bimbo kind of trope of horror movies, and it just felt wrong to me. I didn't like it. So there's more of a altercation with Mike and Martha Mike and Annie, and then Martha comes back and knocks Mike out with the skillet that she got at the dinner scene. And then they leave, they see Perry's dead body, and then they get into the car and are immediately in an accident, and then they get out, and that's when they realize the whole town has just turned into chaos. And I really like the way that we're brought into that part of the episode. Like, the car accident is sudden, it's surprising, and it forces them to go on foot. There's this cool, like, really cool, like, camera thing where it like pans up from the passenger side window of the car to kind of show like how disturbing everything is and like how alone they are on the street. And there's also this really cool like red glow that's permeating throughout the town. It's a good aesthetic choice, kind of showing, kind of implanting in us like, okay, the meteorites have, taken over the town. So then they see a woman that's walking down the street alone, clutching a large portion of hair, long hair. And I don't understand the imagery of that. Like, I don't know what they were going for. I genuinely don't understand. If you know what that was supposed to be, let me know, because I'm at a loss. So, okay, this is where the episode just goes batshit and kind of really starts to fall apart for me. So Annie and Martha are trying to get to the docks, to get to Cole and Steve. And that's when they witness the madness unfolding throughout the town. The fender bender that they walk up to, felt kind of tame and awkward. Like it wasn't, like maybe that was the point to kind of showcase like, oh, the drivers of these two cars that have just had the small fender bender are going to like try to murder each other, over that. But just seeing just a tap of the fender bender just didn't work for me. Then we get what I'm like 90% sure is Zeke the Geek, but it might be Luke. No, I don't think it's Luke Kirby. I don't know. It's Zeke the Geek, I think. But we get this quick shot of a man popping up and saying, "Crazy night, huh?" And I hate it. I hate it. Like, really, what the hell was that? Here's a clip just because I hate it and you guys should hear it too.
Crazy night, huh?
So I hate it. I don't, it's so goofy and out of place and weird. So anyway, as they travel through the town, they pass a guy standing on a police car firing a shotgun in the air, which is a really cool, like, mob mentality, looting imagery in the episode. Like, I have no real complaints with that. Like, and there are various shots of mob mentality, senseless destruction, looting, all, like, the whole 9 yards. And it's well done. Like, it's cool. Like, some of the choreography is a little off. Like, you can tell that they're kind of pulling their punches a little bit. I don't know how else to describe it, but the overall aesthetic of it is very, intense and good. And so a man calls to Annie and says, "Hey, Annie, don't you remember me?" And then immediately gets bludgeoned by someone behind him and like a blood spurts out. It's very violent. And I like that. And I feel like him and Perry represent, again, this catcalling and unwanted attention kind of thing, that men do to women. So also in the scene, here's where we get more MAGA hats. And again, the politics of the show, they align pretty close to my own, but how about just an ounce of subtlety? Again, just don't repeat it. Like, if they had just had one red cap in the bar scene and nowhere else, that would have been a great, quick statement. But no, they had to have at least 3 guys wearing MAGA-like hats in the town chaos scene. And the only thing that accomplishes is to distract the viewer. Like, I know the show has been brigaded by Trump supporters and, like, dogging its depiction of social commentary and everything. And the vast majority of those arguments against the show are just trash. But I really hope that those, like, reactions don't drown out the legitimate criticism that people have about the show's lack of subtlety. And I really hope that they work on that next season. It bothered me because I'm just like, okay, we get it. Like, you can't just do like a little bit and just let it breathe there. It really bothered me. So anyway, they run past storefronts, none of which have Twilight Zone references that I'm aware of. I did look, I couldn't find, I don't think any of them had, like, they were kind of generic names anyway, like toys and stuff. Like, it wasn't like any, like anything that I think would be Easter egg worthy. Although that would have been a pretty interesting, place to put Easter eggs, but whatever. So at this moment, Phil pops up and approaches them. And again, this is his final scene in the episode. And again, he's so one note. Like, even at that moment, he is trying to explain what's going on to them. Like, he's mansplaining what's going on while also trying to convince them that he's sane and everything. And I don't know, like, even if the episode intended him to be, to solely be there for comic relief, I didn't like it. It didn't work for me. It's kind of funny, but in the midst of all the chaos, it feels so forced and awkward. I didn't like it. But what I did like was the kind of subtext of this scene. And maybe I'm reading into it a little much or a little bit, and I'm kind of pouring stuff into it that isn't there. But I feel like Phil may be telling the truth, that he's not really crazy or affected by what's going on. He's still an ass and a know-it-all, but I think in this moment he's harmless. And what I like about this is that Annie and Martha leave him there. The subtext being that their experiences make them distrust all men in this scenario. Like, I just think I like the idea of the subtext being Annie and Martha can no longer trust men because of their experiences in this moment. I think that's an interesting statement for it to make. Of course, his voice does get all distorted, like a Traveler-esque. So maybe he was lying, but I think when it comes down to it, the kind of subtext is there for it's potentially able to, read that into the subtext. So now we get to the dumbest part of the entire episode and maybe the entire season thus far. So they get to a gas station and Martha has come around to the idea of meteorites and has the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Here is a clip of her, of the dumbest moment of this entire season so far.
These things are making them stronger. We have to try. Okay? We have to fight back. Fuck! It's not doing anything!
Martha, you know why. It's just the...
So she thinks they should use the meteorites to fight back, and it is so stupid. Even if like with Phil, even if it's meant to be comic relief and everything, it doesn't work. It falls so flat. It just feels so stupid. It pumps the brakes on the tension of this episode, of this moment where they're in the midst of all this chaos, because it is so ridiculous and dumb. I don't like it. And then it's cut really short because a guy emerges out of nowhere with a piece of meteorite attached to a chain, yelling for them to get off his property, which again, I feel like this must have been a reshoot, or an insert moment or insert shot to establish the chain that Dylan will have later. And it feels so added in, and it's all too sudden. And I don't know, I even feel like maybe the dialogue is 80 yard in. It feels so awkward and just, I didn't like it. Then as they make their way toward the docks, they pass by the fountain that the men are worshiping. And again, that's really asinine, and it doesn't fit. For my taste, it doesn't fit in the scene at all. It doesn't fit the tone. During this stretch of scenes that I've been describing, the episode has shifted its tone significantly I'm adamantly opposed to it, because the plot that was building, the connections that were being built upon in the kind of subtext of, women and their place in a male dominated world, all of that stuff, so much goodwill was created in the opening 15-20 minutes of this episode, only to be just squandered by this ridiculous heightened reality where all the men are going completely crazy. And so in this weird ass fountain worship scene that doesn't fit for my taste at all, we see, I think it's Zeke yelling, "Fuck you, Chad," and then another guy yelling, "Fuck your feelings," which I don't know. Now, that just feels off and weirdly specific. Him saying "fuck your feelings" feels like the show is veering more into male stereotypes. The whole idea of oh, men don't care about your feelings or anything. It's that's just a very broad generalization and everything. It just feels just out of place and weird. I don't like it. So they make it to the dock, and we get a shot on the boat of Cole and Steve drinking, and Steve is drinking with the stone, and he flips out. Cole doesn't want to take a shot with the meteorite or drink with the meteorite, because I think he plops it in the beer. because he's a sensible young man, Steve tries to make out with him, but Cole senses that something's off, and he breaks it up and everything. And then we get a shot of Annie and Martha going, arriving at the docks, and we get this awkwardly written piece of dialogue that I feel like might be ADR'd in also, where Annie says they're on a boat called the Achilles, and Martha says, "How do you know that?" And Annie says, "Don't ask." And I'm like, my immediate reaction was, "Don't ask," because it's really awkwardly written, and we're barely like the audience can barely suspend their disbelief about this. It felt really just clunky. So Annie and Martha get to Cole, and Cole has escaped the boat. Steve is trapped in the boat, despite the fact that men can operate a motorcycle, explain their theory about what's going on, and also have the mental capacity to fashion a weapon out of the meteorites. But Steve can't open a door on a boat. Like, that just felt just really dumb. Just for lack of a better word, it just felt dumb. And so we get the final showdown with Dylan showing up with the chained meteorite that, again, there's no explanation. I feel like it's meant to imply that he killed the guy at the gas station, but there's no scene to indicate that. There's nothing to indicate that he was even, like, nearby, I don't think. He may have been, like, seen in the chaotic, like, town square scene, but I don't remember him, like, it's not established that he's, like, after them, really. He just pops up out of nowhere. And I don't know, like, maybe he was following them, but there's nothing to show that that's what happened. I don't know. So I'm burying the lead, though, because the episode goes even more off the deep end with Dylan's introduction to the dock scene. He is singing the Lionel Richie song that he had playing when he had, when he and Annie were having their magical night. And as creepy as Luke Kirby is able to play, it's still not menacing to me in the least. And it's not a clever callback. It's just silly, and it made me roll my eyes and just really, I just thought it was really just awkward. I was like, again, so much goodwill for the beginning of this episode just to be squandered by this ridiculous last act is just such a shame. So, Annie sees the chained meteorite and exclaims, "What the fuck is that?" Which is also what makes me think that the gas station scene came later and was, like, added in post. Because she's already seen it. Like, what the fuck is that? It's the thing that I just saw 5 minutes ago at the gas station when the man was going to kill us with it. Like, that, like, it doesn't fit. It's awkward and it doesn't fit. It takes me out of the episode. And then, at this point, okay, I have lodged my complaints with Dylan's re-entrance into the episode with this. And this is also a criticism, but also it makes me laugh a lot because it's pretty funny. It's dumb funny, but it's when Dylan yells, "Why don't you like me?" My thought is, like, right there, dude. Like, that's why. Like, what you're doing right now, that's why. It's funny, it's dumb, but Luke Kirby can't really save it despite being a relatively creepy, like, character. He does creepy characters well. It was another eye-rolling kind of thing. So there's an altercation. Cole starts to turn, but fights the change. Annie takes Dylan out, and there's this cool underwater shot of the red glowing water as Dylan sinks from the weight of the meteorite in the chain. So they're rescued, and we're taken into the last scene. Finally, it's in a military tent. They're running tests and everything. So Cole comes up and tells Annie and Martha that they drew his blood, and he's like, "Well, I had this rock in my back pocket the whole night," and that kind of came out of nowhere. But Annie deduces that the scientists won't find any trace of infection because there is none. The meteorites were placebos, paying off the line of dialogue early in the episode in the opening scene where she talks about setting up placebos for her job. Okay. So this is going the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street route, and that is, in theory, okay. But this throws away so much good characterization and genuinely creepy atmosphere, because it feels like they're taking the Maple Street ending without understanding the Maple Street ending, and understanding why it's such an incredible and iconic ending. So the episode is saying that not all men are affected by it because some men can resist the urges, that the majority of them just choose not to. So the show is literally saying that the actions of all of the men in the episode are a result of behavior that is already inside of all men. So are we meant to believe that the meteorites literally had no bearing on the chaos whatsoever? Or was it just an excuse for the men to wreak havoc and destruction? Either way, it's still, in my opinion, and this is going to be harsh, it's still spitting in the face of Maple Street, because what made the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street so iconic was the character interactions and the slow buildup of the community of neighbors turning on each other, seeking a scapegoat for this unknowable sequence of events, and the small seeds of doubt that grow amongst them. So, in contrast, what Not All Men does is create a scenario where meteorites rain down randomly, men go crazy because it's in their blood, and that's it. And I hate that the show is making me think this way, but there's nothing to differentiate the actions of the men from the inaction of the women. None of the women freak out and go crazy or anything. The only thing men can do to stop themselves is to choose to stop themselves. And it doesn't fit. It just feels weird. It just doesn't, I don't know. Are we meant to assume that women are completely immune to mob mentality in this scenario? Is there any Twilight Zone element to this episode, or is it just the placebo that is bringing out the worst in all the men? I wish that there was more development of that. I wish that there was more of a, I don't know, just more of something, more development of that. And it's just so freaking irritating to see an episode that was so compelling in its first half completely and utterly shit the bed in its last half. And it's, like I said, there are scenes in this episode that are so powerful as a statement of feminism, as a vessel to showcase what it's like to be a woman in a world filled with toxic masculinity, and how it feels to be in a moment with a person who could literally snap and kill you and maybe get away with it. At the drop of a hat. Those are terrifying, thoughts and everything. And those are compelling things to bring out. But then it's squandered by just this really haphazard, goofy chaos scene that plays to the cheap seats. And I don't like it. So we end on a fun scene of feminism. The army guy telling Annie that she would look cuter if she smiled more, and Annie telling him no. That was cool. I like that. As we pan across the tent, the TV proclaims that there was a mass shooting and the gunman was a man in his 20s, which I haven't seen the Blue Scorpion yet at the time of this recording, but I kind of wonder what I've pieced together about the plot of the Blue Scorpion. I wonder if this is a little Easter egg for that episode. So we get Peele's closing narration, and I will play that here.
Tonight, Annie Miller found herself in the center of a mysterious and violent epidemic. What she encountered was no material disease, but rather a plague of conscience. One that gave men permission to ignore decency, consent, and fear. And tonight, all it took was a few innocuous little rocks to turn men into monsters. Here, in the Twilight Zone.
So, okay. In this closing narration, Peele says that a plague of conscience gave men permission to ignore decency, consent, and fear. And I think that would have made for a much more compelling and well-rounded episode if instead of the men freaking out and causing mass destruction in the most rudimentary way possible, what if the meteorites caused them to drop the casualness or the institutional misogyny of society that the episode depicted so well and instead made it more overt. It could have made for a more subtle and disturbing episode. Like, instead of having them attack other men and like murder each other and everything, have it be just drop all pretenses of fake chivalry, and just be more overt and like, I don't want to say attack women, but like have them be like more, you know, threatening toward women because they don't have that, like, their inhibitions have been lowered, I guess. I just think that would have made for a more interesting episode instead of this just batshit crazy third act, chaos thing. So I don't know. There was a lot of good in this episode. So on Obsessive Viewer, one of my recurring co-hosts is my friend Kirsten, and I think we're actually going to hang out Saturday, and I'm going to kind of show her this episode, and I think on an upcoming episode of the Obsessive Viewer, I'm going to have her kind of talk about it because I want to get her perspective on it. And maybe I'll throw like a snippet of that into the feed here, but I don't know. Check out Obsessive Viewer for that in the coming weeks or days or whatever. That's my review of Not All Men. It's not all great. Some of it is very great. Some of it's very just incredible and well done. Great dialogue, great writing, great, everything. But there is so much that I have issues with just from the way the storytelling is. Like, I would be very interested to know the background of what happened, or like how this episode was produced, because it feels like it's, I don't know, on one hand, it feels like there were too many cooks. It feels like maybe someone had way too much input and like there was a clash of vision on it, or it feels like they realized that they didn't have something that they needed and they decided to scrap it and do something else entirely at the last minute. It just feels very clunky and out of place. I don't know. And I mean, man, this episode, like I said, it deals with such an important topic and everything. And I wanted to love it. I wanted it to be great, and it was great in certain points, but just really just went off the rails in so many ways during it. So, so that's Not All Men. Next time on the podcast, on the bonus review, I'm going to be reviewing Point of Origin, which at the time of this recording I have seen. I did break my little rule, and I did watch an episode before I was able to record a review of the previous one. And I'm recording this the night before the season finale drops, so I'm going to probably watch The Blue Scorpion tonight or tomorrow before I review Point of Origin. But anyway, that's coming in the coming days hopefully. And then on the main feed, I have up next 100 Yards Over the Rim, which I previously reviewed with Brandon Cruz over on his podcast, submitted for your approval. So if you don't want to wait for my review of 100 Yards Over the Rim, check out that show from about a year and a half ago. I'll put a link in the show notes, of course. And I don't know, I may just focus on finishing the new season of the Twilight Zone. I'm not sure yet. Just kind of have a few like bonus episodes just so I can get this season done, because I've fallen so far behind. And so I can make room for the Black Mirror bonus reviews. But we'll see. Having said all that, that's it for this bonus episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. Let me know what you thought of this episode of The Twilight Zone, because as you can probably tell, like, I had some very, big opinions of this and big reactions to it. So I would be very interested to hear what other people thought of it. You know where to find me, links in the show notes as well. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Anthology is edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. For a full archive of our episodes, go to anthologypod.com/archive. You can also like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod and follow the show on Twitter at OVAnthologyPod. If you enjoy the show, please take a couple minutes to leave us a rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts. This is the easiest way to support what we do, and all it costs is a little bit of your time. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, you can make a PayPal donation at anthologypod.com/donate or support us on Patreon for recurring donations and access to commentary tracks and B-roll audio recorded exclusively for patrons at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Every donation goes toward paying the fees to keep the podcast running and is greatly appreciated. Official Anthology merch, including shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more, can be found in the Obsessive Viewer's TeePublic store. You can find a link to the store in the show notes of this episode and at anthologypod.com/donate. Or you can simply search for Obsessive Viewer at tpublic.com. For information about the Obsessive Viewer's annual live event showcasing short horror films from local filmmakers, check out shocktoberinirvington.com. And for an archive of all our events, as well as news about potential future events, head over to obsessiveviewer.com/live. For more podcast content, you can find our flagship movie and TV review and discussion show, The Obsessive Viewer Podcast, at obsessiveviewer.com, and on Twitter at obsessiveviewer. You can also find Tower Junkies, a podcast where Matt and co-host Tiny share their love of all things Stephen King and his magnum opus, The Dark Tower series, over at towerjunkiespod.com and at towerjunkiespod on Twitter. And finally, check out The Secular Perspective, Tiny's side project podcast, which tackles current events and life's big questions from the perspective of secular hosts Chad and Amanda at thesecularperspective.com. Bumper music for this podcast comes courtesy of As Good As It Gets, which can be found at facebook.com/asgoodasitgetsband. You can also find As Good As It Gets music on Spotify, Google Play, and iTunes. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Kitty!
Why don't you like me?